All right, it's good to see everyone, and it's good to see you. Just a little piece of positive news, as always. That's a good thing. As I wrote in my email last week, is in in 1958, I believe it was, there was an attack, a terrorist attack at a Chabad in Far Chabad in Israel, and in response to that, the Rebbe sent many young Chabad students to go to Israel to strengthen the communities and strengthen Israel, and it really overturned Israel and really strengthened Yiddishkeit there. And so the same thing this week, Chabad headquarters sent 5 young rabbinical students to Sydney to strengthen the Chabad community there, because our response is always going to be to do something positive. Of course, we take practical security measures and lobby the government for necessary things. But we also have to make sure we're not just alive, but we're thriving, and that is the point of that. Okay, so with that being said, we're here thriving, and we are going to be studying Tanya, and today's Tanya is in the merit of all of those who are still recovering from the attack. There are many still going through multiple surgeries, and so we pray for them, and we are going to study in their merit. So we're in the middle of a topic here, a very, very involved topic. And the topic is about intention. And the topic of intention has many different layers to it. And the layer we're up to right now is where when you have, okay, so we know when you do a mitzvah, there's multiple components to doing a mitzvah, but one of the components is the mitzvah that you do rises and connects to God. Okay, so putting aside your connection to God, the mitzvah itself rises and connects to God, and how far it rises depends on your kavanah, on your intention. Okay, so again, how far the mitzvah itself will rise depends on your intention. And just as a reminder, we have explained in these chapters that what is intention? Intention is when I study, I have in mind what is propelling me to do that study, right? What is making me want to study? Is it my love and awe of God? That is what kavanah is. And based on our kavanah, based on our intention, that will decide how far that mitzvah can reach. So we explained, if you do a mitzvah with your natural love to God, it will reach to the second to lowest world, or let's say the third to highest world. It will reach the third to highest world, the world of Yetzirah, the world of formation. That's the world of, so to speak, animalistic love, natural love. But if you create a love to God, that's what's propelling you to do the mitzvah. Then it rises to the world of Briyam. It rises to the world of creation, which is the second to highest world. Okay. Now, we explained last week that as well, that the mitzvah becomes united with the world in which it elevates to. And when we go to heaven, we can enjoy the benefit of that mitzvah. So that's what it means. The reward of a mitzvah is the mitzvah itself, meaning that when we go to heaven, we will enjoy the light of that mitzvah itself. That mitzvah will become united with the world that it's going to elevate to, and then we can enjoy the light of that mitzvah. So what we're going to explain right now is that these spiritual worlds that we're talking about, where your mitzvah elevates to, the mitzvah itself unites with the world itself. Okay, but you as a soul, when your soul ascends to heaven, God willing, not very soon at all for anybody, but when the soul ascends to heaven and enjoys the light of its mitzvah, it does not unite with the world, it sits in the world and enjoys the world, right? So just for example, every world has multiple layers to it, right? This world has the energy to the world, the godly energy, and then there is the world itself. There's the earth and the water and the fish and the plants and the sea and the people. The same thing in the spiritual world. There's the energy to the world. That energy, your mitzvah can elevate, become united with the energy of the world. However, your soul sits in the world, doesn't unite with the energy of the world, but it enjoys a shine of the energy of the world, which comes from your mitzvah. Okay? So, so this is what we are going to be discussing right here. Okay? So let's read over here. This is why we said last time, by the way, that's why someone who's passed away, we do a mitzvah in their merit, because the mitzvah we do in the merit elevates the mitzvah we do in their merit is something they can enjoy in that world because that mitzvah was done because of their inspiration. So let's take a look here. He says, while the worship rises to God, that's not so with souls which are not absorbed within the 10 divine sefirot, 10 divine emanations. Rather, they remain in the chambers and repositories of either Bria, Yetzirah, those spiritual worlds. Being stuck into the chambers doesn't mean the souls cannot enjoy any divine radiance. They are just limited to the diminished radiance shining in the world. Okay, so again, they do not become one with the God's energy. They enjoy God's energy. That is why, by the way, when Mashiach comes, when we come down here, back into this world, at some point in this world, we will become united with God's energy, not just enjoy it. But that's a discussion for another time. And rather than actually merging with God, they merely enjoy the radiance of the divine presence from a distance, the radiance of the divine presence referring to the blessed infinite light, as it is merged with the 10 sefirot of Bria or Yetzirah shining through the filter in diminished fashion. Unlike the sefirot whose energy flows directly from the blessed infinite one, the soul can only perceive a diminished godliness that shines to its vantage point. And that's because as a soul, you are a being. And just as here in this world, we have a limited capacity, our minds are limited by our bodies, our souls are also limited. Because our souls have to feel themselves as separate entities from God, therefore, they can only enjoy God's light. They do not merge entirely with God's light. Our mitzvahs, they can merge with God's light. But we cannot merge with God's light because we are souls. Okay? Let's go to the next page. And again, we're in chapter 39, and we're now going to go to page 459. Now he says like this. This radiance is in fact nothing other than the radiance of the person's actual Torah worship, the divine light of the mitzvah as it shines in the world. Since, as we learned in the chapter, the reward for mitzvahs is the mitzvah itself. The Tanya explains elsewhere that the mitzvahs you do enable you to enjoy it. Just to give an example, right? You cannot, in other words, there's two elements. Number one is you only enjoy the shine of the mitzvah of the Torah that you studied. Number two, you can only perceive it through the good deeds that you did. So this is what it talks about here in the footnote. He adds the commentary here. The Zohar speaks of garments made of good deeds, which a person did, following the commandments of the Torah. Through them, the soul stands in the lower Garden of Eden, clothed in these precious garments, and if that soul ascends through the opening into the higher heaven, other precious and lofty garments are presented before her, made from the desire and attentiveness to the heart during Torah study and prayer. So in other words, the intention you have during the mitzvahs and the Torah study give you garments through which you can enjoy the shine of that world. So for example, if someone, God forbid, had COVID and they lost their sense of smell, sense of taste, they can be eating the most tasty foods, but they will not be able to enjoy those foods. So the same thing is when we ascend to heaven, we want to be able to not only be able to, so to speak, feel that divine shine, but enjoy it. And the only way to enjoy it is through the intention that we had through the mitzvahs that we did. So again, it's twofold. Number one, the mitzvahs you do become united with that world through the intention that you had. And that intention also creates for you a garment through which you can enjoy it. So think about it like this. The intention, according to what this is saying, does you a twofold benefit. Number one is it allows your mitzvah to ascend. Okay, so you can do a mitzvah, but depending on how much intention you have, that defines how high that mitzvah can go. Okay? If you don't have intention, then it gets stuck very low. Number two is the intention also gives you a garment through which you can enjoy the shine of the mitzvah itself. So you can now well understand why you want to do mitzvahs with intention. Imagine you live your entire life and you do mitzvahs without intention. You just do them because you have to, or because it's rote, or because it's habit. And then you go to heaven and they say, well, you were very righteous. You did all good things. You go to heaven. You'll sit there, but you won't be able to enjoy much because your mitzvahs aren't there and you don't have any garments to enjoy it with. Okay, that would be very disappointing. So, aside from what we said in the previous chapter, chapter 38, that if you do a mitzvah without intention, it's like a body without a soul. It's like a lifeless mitzvah. We're adding here that as far as your personal enjoyment of that mitzvah, for you to enjoy that mitzvah, really you need to have intention. Otherwise, you can go your entire life doing mitzvahs and you won't be able to enjoy it that much. So it does sound very harsh. There is a possibility, as it describes in other places in Tanya, that if you've done mitzvahs, and then later on you start doing mitzvahs with intention, you have the ability to raise your previous mitzvahs. In other words, it's not like all is lost. In other words, you can elevate your previous mitzvahs. In other words, if you did a mitzvah without intention, and then later you did a mitzvah with intention, it's possible that you can raise the previous mitzvah and elevate it with the intention you have for the later mitzvah. That's a possibility. It's not being discussed here because it's not the topic here, but that's important to note. There's teshuvah. There are ways to elevate, and that's why it's important. One shouldn't say, "Well, what's the point of doing a mitzvah if, anyways, they didn't have intention?" No, you should do it. It's there, and once it exists, there's a possibility to elevate it. There's a possibility to uplift it. If you never did the mitzvah, you never created it, there's no possibility of elevating it. But definitely continue doing mitzvahs, even if you don't have intention, because there is a possibility to elevate it at a later date. Any comments or questions? Or is all clear as day? All is clear as day. I get it. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. So we're ready to go to the next section. So far, if you recall, we said there are 4 spiritual worlds. There's the world which is so connected to God that people don't. The language they described in the video we showed is the beings are the is and is, but they don't know the is and is. Meaning, the beings created in Atzilut feel like an extension of God. They are beings, but they don't feel it so much. They feel godliness all the time. So the world of Atzilut, the world of emanation. Then you have the world of creation, where the beings feel like they are created, but they feel so connected to God they can never imagine being disconnected. Then you have the world of Yetzirah, the world of formation. We have a little bit more self-identity. We feel very much ourselves, but we always know we have a source. Then you have the world of Asiyah, the world of creation, where, like in this world, things can feel they don't even have a source. They're not even connected to God. So we've described that if you do a mitzvah, you can elevate it either to the second highest world, Bria, creation, or world of Yetzirah. What about the world of Atzilut? Can something be elevated to the world of Atzilut? But before we talk about the world of Atzilut, before we discuss whether you can elevate to the world of Atzilut, we need to describe what is Atzilut. So just to give you an idea of what Atzilut is, the author of the Tanya, Rabbi Shneir Zalman Avlidi, was a very spiritual man. And he would never write the entire world. He would never write the entire word Atzilut. This world we're talking about, the highest world, he would never write it fully. He would get to the first 3 letters, and then he would go into a trance, because it's just, to him, understanding that world, it's so exalted and so elevated, it would like cause him to have feelings of cleaving to God, an intense longing. So we don't relate to that because we're not so spiritual. But if you were someone who could appreciate the world of Atzilut, one would step back for a moment and be in a level of awe. So we can already understand this world of Atzilut is something well beyond our world. And that's what he starts up describing here in Tanya. This world of Atzilut, he's going to describe it as a world which is well beyond our understanding. So he says like this: as for the world of Atzilut, which is beyond the mental capacity, grasp, and understanding of a created intellect, because the blessed infinite light, one's Chokhmah, Bina, and Das, is utterly and perfectly merged with the light there in Atzilut, with a merging which is more awesome, wondrous, with infinitely more dignity and more power than in the world of Bria. So if you recall, I said, in Atzilut, they know they are and are, but they don't know they are. The beings there know they are a something, but they don't know that they are a something, because they really don't feel separate from God. That's what the word Atzilut means, as he says here in the note. The word Atzilut comes from the word Eitzel, means close, near. Atzilut is utterly and seamlessly merged with God's infinite light. So even though it's not God's infinite light, but it is so merged with it that it doesn't feel itself as any separate identity. So this is the world of Atzilut. And I just got to skip up here to the week before of pictures, okay? And so that's why obviously we can't understand it. It's so divine that it would be hard to understand. Let's take a look here at the text again. He says, And that's why Atzilut is beyond the mental capacity, grasp, and understanding of a created intellect. For a thing to be comprehensible to the human mind, it has to have defining properties and finite boundaries. Since Atzilut is next to the infinite light, it's also infinite, so the created intellect is no tool to grasp it. Think about it like this. Can you, we cannot understand infinite, right? It's just not possible for us. We cannot, in order to understand anything, we need to be able to wrap our mind around it. In order to wrap our minds around something, this is an interesting point. In order to wrap our minds around something, we need to have the ability to have something to talk about, parameters, right? So if I tell you to go out to, right, it's like, your spouse ever asks you to go out and buy something. Buddy, can you hear me on there? Over there? I see we lost a couple people. I hope the internet's okay. Um, so if I ask you to go out and buy me something, right? Um, let me just put in the chat. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you. So this happens all the time, right? My wife tells me, "Can you go out and buy a bunch of tomatoes?" What's my question? What would my question be?
Why?
No. How many?
How many? Yeah, that was my next one.
Exactly. How many? Yeah, and I don't know. We just need a couple, right? Or you ever ask your grandmother for a recipe? Oh, a little bit of this, a little bit. Well, how much? We cannot understand things unless there's limitation to it, right? Unless there's a boundary to it. Otherwise, we don't understand it, right? So if I try to describe to you a table and I ask you, well, how big is it? I don't know. Well, I can't wrap my head around it, right? Or you say it goes on, so the same thing, infinite is not something we can grasp. That's why the actual number infinity is not a number that we can grasp or exists or something we can ever imagine. That's why God is impossible to understand, right? People want to know, well, when did God start? When was God created? Well, no, God was never created. God always was, is, and will be. There was no time he was never present. It's not something we could wrap our minds around because there's no beginning and end to wrap to grasp our minds around, right? We can only grasp things that have a beginning and an end. If I'm describing you a place that you've never been in, I say you, well, there were really large steps. So you already have in your mind whatever you want to describe large steps. And from one step to another is a foot, and there's a big tall building, 2 stories. You have to have in your mind some limitation to this building you're imagining. If there's no limitation to anything, you will not be able to imagine it. So the same thing, God is infinite. And therefore, automatically, God is not something we can wrap our minds around. We can understand. That's why we always say we can understand things about God. In other words, we can know that God is infinite, but I can never understand infinite. Because something that doesn't have a beginning and an end, I cannot grasp, I cannot wrap my head around it. It's not possible. We need definitive beginnings and ends, okay, in order to understand and grasp something. That is why, by the way, time inherently has to have been time could not have been around forever. Time cannot be infinite. Time must be a creation. If you want to get philosophical here, let's want to get philosophical, okay? One of the proofs that's brought in Jewish philosophy that there has to be a God is time itself. What do I mean? Time is finite. Time is finite. There's no way around it because this second is not that second and that second is not the next second, right? So every moment of time is defined. And the same way, if you add numbers, right? You can never get to the number infinity, right? If you keep counting, you'll never reach infinity because infinity is beyond a number. You can never add, you can never keep adding until you get to that infinite number. You're just always more and more and more and more, right? It's like the question, is a million closer to infinity than one? The answer is no, because infinity is not just, a bunch more numbers to reach infinity. So time itself is finite. You can never add enough finite moments to reach infinite time, which means time had to start somewhere because each segment of time is a limited beginning and end. So unless one believes that you can count to infinity, which is not possible, you also cannot have time having existed infinitely. That's why there has to have been a time that God created time and time started, which is itself boggles the mind and which itself is hard to grasp God. But again, these are things we can know about God logically we can know they exist without understanding them themselves. This is what we say about God, we can know what he is without grasping it. Okay? We can know what he is without grasping it. Anyway, so as it pertains to this, Atzilut is a world that we can never fully grasp because it's so close to God, it's infinite. In order for us to grasp God, we need more finite measures. Okay, in order for us to grasp God, we need finite details. And unless we have finite details, there's nothing that we can grasp. Am I making sense? Am I making sense? Um, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. Good. I'm making sense, hopefully, that you understand that you don't understand.
Well, it's interesting because I just thought that very thing yesterday. Where did I think about it often, but particularly yesterday for some reason? Where did God start? I mean, who started God? Where did that come from?
Right, right. Exactly. So I hope I gave you some explanation now.
Yeah.
And ultimately that's why it's something that will always like trigger your mind because the answer ultimately is something we can't understand. In other words, logically we know there has to be a God.
Yeah.
And this is where philosophy is so frustrating because philosophy tells us things that we know have to be, but we also can't understand them. If anybody wants a really good book on Jewish philosophy, if you're willing to do a deep dive, I'm a big fan of this book called God, Rationality, and Mysticism by Professor Yitzchak Bloch. I don't think it's in print anymore, but you can find it. Um, oh, you can, yeah, you'll see it on the recording. There's this book, I'll actually share it with you. It's a great book. See if it's in print now. You can still buy it, yep. So if anybody likes Jewish philosophy, he was a professor of philosophy, also Orthodox Jew. He was a Baal Teshuvah. A very, very worth it book to read. So God, Rationality, Mysticism. Very, very, very good book. Very worth it. For those who like philosophy. But anyways, be that as it may. Um, okay, be that as it may. Let us continue here. Good to see those who have joined. Okay, someone has to watch the recording. That's how it goes. All right, so now he's going to say why the highest world is different from the second to highest world, Bria. So he says, because there in the world of Bria, okay, so the world of Bria, which is different, um, the light has been downgraded so that it shines in a diminished, limited fashion. So now we're understanding, right? We've heard of the word tzimtzum. We said it many times, diminishing the light. At a very basic level, diminishing God's light means taking God's infinite light and making it more finite. Because without making God's light finite, there could be no space for creations and there could be no space for us to grasp God. Um, so let's continue. But there in the world of Riyah, the light has been downgraded so that it shines in a diminished, limited fashion, and I'm going to explain why this is so important in a moment. In order that created intellects can receive God's chachma, wisdom, bina, understanding, das, understanding, to know God and to understand and grasp something of the blessed infinite light within the intellectual capacity of their created minds, which are confined to the capacity and limited scope. This is such an important point. It's like so amazing it's being like glossed over here, but I'm going to explain that this is really the whole foundation of Jewish mysticism, what we're reading here. I'm just going to continue to read the next paragraph and then explain. So the diminishment of God's light in the world of Bria was necessary in order that the existence of separate created intellects should not become obliterated, and if, instead of being obliterated, they would simply lose their separate identity through being reabsorbed back to their source, they wouldn't be creations at all any longer. Rather, they would simply be reabsorbed in their source root in godliness. So the diminishment of God's light helps create creations. Okay, so this is what it's saying. It's making the argument. Why does God need to limit his light? He actually made 2 points here. He made 2 points here. Why does God need to limit his light? One is in order that created intellects can understand God. And number two, in order that creations can exist. Because if there was never a limitation to God's light, we would be reabsorbed in God's light. All right, so here is such an important point in this is like this is the whole basis of Jewish mysticism that I don't want to gloss over this point and get it missed. So we've been studying Tanya for a while. You may have noticed we talk about different worlds and God's diminishment of light, and we say God does this because of this, and God does that because of that, right? So, like for example, we said here God needs to diminish his light in order for created beings to exist. Let me ask you a question. God himself is can do anything, right? I have a hunch that if God wanted, God could have created us without the need for all these four worlds. In other words, we could have been created directly from God. God could have skipped all of these diminishments and all these worlds, going from one level to the next level to the next level to the next level. The four worlds are not all, by the way. There's many things before it. Okay, I have a hunch that God, in his infinite ability, could have created us directly from himself. He could have created a world from his infinite being without any breaks. It didn't need. No, he didn't need to go in a process to create us, right? No, right. We always say we need to go step by step, right? In order to know, Shakespeare, you need to learn the ABCs first, right? We need to go step by step. So the same thing we say, in order for God to create us, he needed to go step by step. He took his light and he diminished it lower and lower until it came to us. But if we believe God is all powerful, almighty, God didn't have to do it that way. So Jewish mysticism says that's correct. That's correct. But God wanted to do it this way. Why did he want to do it this way? This is the important point. God wanted to do it this way so that we could feel and understand connected to godliness, so that we can have elements of godliness that we can grasp and understand and that we appreciate. He wanted to do it in a logical way so we have what to discuss about. Okay, what do I mean by that? We've been saying throughout these couple classes that in order to feel love towards God, in order to feel awe towards God, one needs to one needs to study about God. So when we say study about God, what exactly can I study about God? Well, I can study at a very basic level. I can know that I wouldn't be alive without God. I can feel gratitude towards God. But deep layers of appreciation, understanding of God, I need to study God himself. The problem is God himself is basically impossible to study, as we just described in the segment a moment ago, right? We brought philosophy to show that God is infinite, and because God is infinite, we really can't understand God. Okay? So we can spend all our day talking about God and basically saying how much we don't understand him. And that's true. That would add an element of awe towards God, have more of an appreciation for him, more than just, well, he's the one that gives me life. Okay. But then God also wanted to make that there are parts of him that we can, to a certain extent, understand. And that is why God created these four worlds. These four worlds are where God takes his infinite light and diminishes it into levels and layers that we can understand it. Okay? So God takes of his infinite light and takes it in a way that we can appreciate and understand him, so to speak. It's a diminishment of God, a layer of God that we can understand. And typically, when you see a explanation, a mystical explanation of any, when you see a typical mystical explanation of any holiday, okay, like we did for the holidays, right? Like we did for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Simchat Torah, okay? That was only possible for us to have a mystical discussion of the meaning of the holidays because God created this logical system. Because God created this whole system of the diminishment of his light, there were different multiple layers of God's light, and different holidays and elements of the holidays corresponded to different layers of godliness, as we call it. And therefore, we were able to have a discussion. We're able to appreciate the holidays more. And so that was the point of there. That was the point in this line. What he's saying here is specifically because God decides to diminish his light, therefore we have the opportunity to discuss and to connect with God. We have the opportunity. We don't drink water during the fast. So we have the ability to discuss, and we have the opportunity to discuss and to have what to talk about. Now, I just want to say when the Kabbalah came popular, it was actually very controversial. Okay, because when we think about it, this whole what I'm calling godliness for a reason is very strange. Okay, so what comes out really is there's God himself, infinite. Then there's God's light, which we're going to call godliness. Then there's us. Now, we throw out the word godliness all the time, but when you think about it, it's actually a strange word. I mean, does any other religion talk about godliness? In Hebrew, by the way, it's called Elokut, right? There's either God or there's created beings. Well, some religions have, God being invested in a person. But putting that aside, um, godliness is an interesting line, right? You ever hear anybody talking about godliness? You ever think about how that's a funny term? This is what this, huh? No? You ever thought about the word godliness? It's a funny term, no? What do you mean? It's either God or it's creations. What is this word godliness? Elokut. But this is what the Kabbalah added to our discussion. Jewish mysticism added, no, there is something called Elokut, godliness. It's not God himself. It's not a creation. It's a emanation of God's light. Very much connected to God, but not God himself. Closest explanation is like the rays of the sun connected to the sun. We call it godliness. It's not a creation. And it's within godliness that we can feel connected to God. I want to show you, I want to show you, no, well, I don't want to show you, I want to actually explain to you, um, just how fascinating this idea is. If you look in Torah, Torah has some physical descriptions of God. Torah says, God's feet stood on this mountain. The Torah says, and God got angry. The Torah says, God was placated. It says a lot of things about God. And all the commentaries want to know how can we say give physical descriptions to God, right? Or God doesn't fall asleep or this and that. All the commentators want to know how can we say physical descriptions of God? So Maimonides, who is the more, the non, so to speak, the non-Kabbalistic explanation, Maimonides, let me see if I can pull up his text. Maimonides says, let me see if I can find a text. Let's see. Anyways, Maimonides basically says that all of these are not actual descriptions of God. They are only written there so we can appreciate it and understand it. Let me see where he says this. Okay, he says, um, where is this? Um, trying to find it. Trying to find anyways, the point is Jewish mysticism came and gives a different answer. Jewish mysticism says no. It's not just we're giving you descriptions of God that help us have, the Torah is speaking in language that's not true, but just so we can understand it. It's actually describing godliness. So when it says God falls asleep, it's talking about a level of godliness. God himself, nothing ever happens to God. God himself doesn't change. Godliness, yes. When God gets angry, what does that mean? That means God's emanation, as it appears through the 10 sefirot, through the 10 emanations. The attribute of anger is right now, primary. God gets placated, so to speak. That's referring to God's kindness coming revealed. So all of these are a description of godliness. That's also what it explains as many of the names of God. Why does God have so many names? God himself has no name. God himself has no name. A name is actually, if you think about it, a name is really, nobody needs a name for themselves. The names are for other people. Okay, names are so people can call you. So actually, the names of God are actually descriptions of different levels of God, different layers of God, not God himself. That is why, if you ever thought about it, how do we start off every single blessing? How do we start off every single blessing? Anybody knows? What are the first words of every single blessing?
Baruch
Yeah, what's next?
Atar Hashem.
Yeah, what word is after that?
Baruch
Eloheinu.
Eloheinu
Yeah,
Melech Olam.
very good. All right, so think about it. We just describe God in 4 different ways. Okay, we said Baruch, blessed. All right, who are we blessing? Ata, you. Well, who is you? God, right? Then we use God's tetragrammaton, right? Baruch Ata Hashem. Then we use the name Elokeinu, and then we say Melech HaOlam, King of the world. So we just describe God in 4 different ways, right? And so the question is, I mean, why can't I just say Baruch Atah? I mean, well, what's with the Baruch Atah Hashem, Elokeinu, Melech HaOlam? What's with all of this? So one of the explanations of this blessing is actually a blessing is actually drawing down of God's infinite light from God Himself. So we start off saying Baruch Atah you, God Himself, which has no name. Then Hashem, which is God's next level name, which is not its godliness, it's a shine of God's light. And then Elokeinu, a lower level of God's light. And then Melech HaOlam, the lowest level, God as He's king on this world. So we're drawing from Atah, from God Himself, through the different names of God, all the way down to this world. So, but that's just an example where Jewish mysticism helps us and tells us that all these names and all these descriptions of God are typically a description of godliness, not God Himself. And I think if you recall, in our discussions of the holidays, really the whole thing of the holidays was always really, this touches this element of godliness and that touches that element of godliness, but then this reaches to the essence, right? And we spoke about the word essence a lot. That's what essence is. Essence is God Himself, not godliness, but the essence of God. And in ourselves, by the way, in our souls, remember we spoke about the 5 levels of the soul. It's the same thing to a certain extent. The deepest level of our soul, Yechida, is our essence. Then there are different layers of our soul, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya. They're extensions of our soul, but they're not the essence of who we are. And so the same thing is with God. God has godliness. So, so next time you hear the word godliness, you realize I don't want to say it's a made-up word, but it's really an invention. I don't want to say it's invented because it's not invented, it's true. But it comes from Jewish mysticism, which we believe Jewish mysticism comes from Moses and was hidden until mostly the time of the Arizal. It was discussed, but it was meant to remain only amongst the scholars. The Arizal, who was a sage from 500 years ago in the city of Safed, he's the one that said the study of Jewish mysticism is for everyone. But until then, it was hidden. And so people had to give more rational explanations, or I would say rational, more technical explanations, why the Torah talks about God's feet and God's hands and God's this and God's that. But Jewish mysticism gives us a secret that God created this entire system. Now, why, by the way, is this entire system being revealed to us now? Because when Mashiach comes, this system will be revealed. And so we're getting a taste of it already now before the times of Mashiach. That's one of the reasons. There's multiple reasons. There's many, many reasons given why Jewish mysticism is being revealed now. Now, let us continue. Let us continue. Okay, so sorry. So my point was that this line that he said here is so off the cuff, but it's such an important point that so many people miss it. Is he's saying here that God created this entire system so that created intellects can receive God's wisdom, understanding, and knowledge to know God and to understand and grasp something of the blessed infinite light within the intellectual capacity of their created minds. So in other words, God wanted to create godliness so that when it comes to the holiday of Sukkot, you can feel connected to the spirituality of Sukkot. God wanted to create godliness. So when you put on tefillin, you can feel connected to the spirituality of tefillin. There's a Hasidic book, by the way. This is, by the way, why I keep saying is that the Tanya is not really Hasidic philosophy in itself. It tells you why you need to study Hasidic philosophy. Hasidic philosophy will explain to you all the holidays, will explain to you all the mitzvahs, will explain to you how you connect to God through all those specific deeds, through those specific mitzvahs. Here's if you ever want to study it, it's very good. It's very deep, but it's a very good book. Sichos in English, Derech Mitzvosecha. Derech Mitzvosecha. So Chabad actually put it all online. Sichos in English, you could buy the book or you can read it online because that's their opinion. They want to put everything for free. So here, for example, they explain these mitzvos in the mystical terms. So, for example, you have the prohibition, the law of loving your fellow Jew, the mitzvah of confession and teshuvah, the mitzvah of blessing the kohanim, the mitzvah of the metzorah, the mitzvah of sanctifying God's name, the prohibition of desecrating God's name, the mitzvah to appoint a king, the mitzvah to build a sanctuary, the mitzvah of tzitzis. By the way, when you study all these mitzvahs, you'll find out how they apply to us today as well. because even though technically I'm not a Kohen, I can connect with the spiritual element of it. Same thing with the Metzora. We don't have the lepers today, but I can connect with the spiritual element of it. So this is where Jewish mysticism helps us connect with God and godly, feel connected to God because now we have what to discuss. And that's what I was saying is the whole Tanya talks about this, is we need to study about God, learn about God in order to feel connected to God. And so that's only possible because God created this thing, an extension of himself called godliness. Any questions or comments? Because this is such, to me, it's such an important point, and I think many people don't even know about it. Just take it for granted. This whole concept of godliness. I personally, I don't know if any other religion has such a line of godliness. And we've spoken about it as a matter of fact so many times, but it was important today we actually discuss it directly. So, anybody has any thoughts or comments on this concept of godliness, or you're struggling with it? I just want you to know, by the way, it was very controversial when it first came out. People like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean godliness? Like, what? Wait, there's God, and there's people. What's this whole godliness? It was really it was very controversial when Kabbalah started to become popular. People like didn't understand what we're talking, like what it was talking about.
I
Yes.
My understanding it was just more like that we, by doing holy things, bring godliness to this world, but I didn't think it was related exactly to God himself.
Right. So I think the language of godliness, I think, I'm not sure. In Hebrew, it's called Elokut. Okay. So the Hebrew language for these two things, there's what's called Elokut, which means godliness, and Elokah, which means God himself. So yeah, when we do a mitzvah, we bring godliness. We'll also bring God. That's really where the discussion of, godliness is more the revelation of God. This is where I'd say like this, really, God is always present. El- Elokut is the revelation of God. But anyways, yeah, it's an important thing that we use it so often. We never really thought that there's a distinction, right? When you do a mitzvah, you bring godliness. Well, what does that mean? Why don't we just say we're bringing God, right? Okay. Sorry if you hear a baby crying in the background. I don't know if you do or not. All right, let's continue. So now he's going to get to what his point was. I sort of created my own side point, which was important to discuss. He says like this. So in the world of Bria, it is this diminishment. One second. One second. Here's the baby. Okay. Oh, no. Okay. Yeah, the thing's no. Okay, so all right. So in the world of Bria, it is the diminishment which enables the blessed infinite ones, Chachma Bina Das, to reach and illuminate these created separate souls. But that wouldn't happen in Atzilut, which has very little diminishment. Remember, because of the diminishment, it makes godliness not infinite, and therefore we can grasp it. But in Atzilut, where very little diminishment, there is diminishment, but very little. It's impossible for created intellects to receive the light of God's undiminished intellect, and that is why we say no thought of theirs can grasp him at all, right? We say, lo machshavotai machshavotechem, my thoughts are not your thoughts. Now, can we describe God as having thoughts? This is just an example, by the way. God is God. We can't give him any description. So Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism explains when we talk about any description of God, even God's thoughts, we're talking about godliness. Which level of godliness? Well, the Kabbalists will explain that's talking about the world of Atzilut. Even though Atzilut is beyond the mental capacity to grasp an understanding of a created intellect, it doesn't mean that no soul can reach that level. You just can't use ordinary intellect to get there. All right, so till now we've been saying that Atzilut is a world where there's so little diminishment that it's infinite, that a regular being cannot reach there. But now we're going to say, but a tzaddik, a truly righteous individual which has a more elevated soul, let's see how they can connect to Atzilut. That's why for most souls, even tzaddikim, the world of Atzilut cannot be their home, and consequently, Atzilut is only the repository of very few, especially great tzaddikim. So there are a couple tzaddikim who can reach there. How do great tzaddikim reach a consciousness of Atzilut if, as we've explained, it is impossible for created intellect to grasp? Because the worship of great tzaddikim is on a level that vastly transcends even intellectually generated reverence and love, which comes from being a das of God's greatness. Remember, we said what elevates a soul to the world of Bria, to the world of creation, is if we create a love to God through our mind. So what love can be greater than that? What love are they generating? Well, he didn't explain here, but he's saying just as the world of Atzilut vastly transcends the Bina Das of any created intellect. So he's saying somehow these tzaddikim are creating some level of worship that is not just through their intellect alone. They worship somehow God through the highest level, through chokhmah. Uh, in other words, usually in order for us to create any feelings, we need to use the level of bina. Bina is understanding. When chokhmah is like the seminal idea, and bina is understanding it. But the problem with bina is you're breaking the idea apart. It's very much you. It's the way you think. I don't want to go too far in this because most of us are never going to be there. The point being, in case you want to know if you can get to Atzilut, normally you can't, unless you're some elevated soul. Unless you're some elevated soul, and he explains a little bit more about these elevated souls. Rather, the worship of these souls of Atzilut is on the level of actual chariot to the Blessed Infinite One, so that their separate identity is lost in His. She's ready, and they are absorbed in His light. So what he's saying here is like this: if we understand the world of Atzilut to be a world in which God is, if we understand the world of Atzilut to be a world in which God is not diminished, right? Where the world is where it's just a sign of God's light, it's infinite. Then, in order for someone to connect the world of Atzilut, they would really have to not feel themselves, and that's why he's saying only a tzaddik who really doesn't feel themselves, who feels themselves like a chariot to God. What is a chariot? A chariot basically is the way they would describe anything that follows exactly the will of its rider, right? The wagon does not decide where it wants to go. It's where the wagon driver decides to go, right? So a wagon has no self-identity. It completely follows where you're leading it to. And today we might say it's a car. Okay, a car has no self-identity, though maybe today with AI, cars have self-identity. But let's go to the good old cars. They have no self-identity, right? It will only go where you lead it to. So the same thing. If you are a soul who has such an elevated level of worship that you literally do not feel yourself, you just feel like a conduit for God's will, such a tzaddik can possibly reach the level of Atzilut. Just to tell you a story, there was one time the fifth Chabad Rebbe was doing something, and someone questioned him in Jewish law, and the Rebbe Rashab told him is that since a little child, I know it's the right thing because since a little child, I only do things that are exactly what God wants, without even thinking. It's somehow he elevated himself to this level where he does the right things. Again, it's a level that's above me, but that's the level you have to be. You have to be at such an elevated. Remember, we said you cannot maintain your identity and be in the world of Atzilut, since the world of Atzilut is an infinite shine of God's divine light. So beings cannot feel themselves as beings. So the only way for a soul to really connect with God's infinite light is really not to feel themselves as a separate identity. And this is why great tzaddikim really express God. Okay, let me continue. Both them and everything that is theirs, through the observance of Torah mitzvahs, such tzaddikim resemble what the sages, the patriarchs, were generally a chariot to God because of all their days. So, for example, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they were chariots to God. They were an expression of God's infinite divine light. So let's just, so what's the point of these people? Well, number one, they help us, I would say. Okay, so these souls that are such elevated, let's just take the Lubavitcher Rebbe, in my opinion, was a soul of the world of Atzilut. Someone so divinely inspired and connected that he only did what was the will of God. There was no self-identity there, And so these are people that help us feel connected to God. We said earlier in the Tanya, we quoted in chapter 2, it says, you are all connected to the Lord your God, you are all alive. And the Talmud asks, how do we actually connect to God? And the Talmud answers, through connecting to the tzaddikim, through connecting to the righteous people of the world, we can connect to God. And so to me, I see it as connecting with very righteous people is it gives us an understanding and a feeling of transcendence. We can transcend ourselves a little bit when we feel and understand and know that there's something beyond the day-to-day life that we see. In other words, I am a human being who is aspiring to get higher. Let's put it this way, right? I'm a physical being trying to connect to the spirituality. But a tzaddik shows us that really we are spiritual beings that connect to the physical. I think Rabbi Jacobson coined this term. He says, we think of ourselves as physical beings having a spiritual experience, but really we are spiritual beings having a physical experience. He's right, but most of us don't feel that way. We naturally feel that we are physical beings having a spiritual experience. But when we see these great tzaddikim who are so spiritual and they're like having a physical experience, again, when you read about the Rebbe, his physical life was not very physical. He barely slept, he barely ate, okay? He didn't need much. He was a spiritual being in the physical world. That helps us understand in ourselves that we too truly, we are spiritual beings having a physical experience. Someone asked here, what is the purpose of the Atzilut for us if we can't reach it? Well, there's multiple purposes. Number one is, as I said, there's some souls that are of that world and we connect with them. But number two, there are even layers that are higher than the world of Atzilut. From a very simple point, the world of Atzilut is there because there's a diminishment of God's light that comes from layer to layer to layer. Atzilut is one of those layers till the light can get to us, okay? It goes in levels of diminishment. Also, it helps us appreciate that there's something beyond us by understanding that it's Atzilut. You'll also appreciate that many of the mitzvos will connect us to the world of Atzilut. As you study Chassidic philosophy, you study about Atzilut as well. It's in there as well. But at a very simple level, the way God brought his infinite light down to this world, it went step by step by step by step. Atzilut is one of those steps. But as we also saw here, there are some righteous people who are the world of Atzilut. And through those tzaddikim, we can have some appreciation of what Atzilut is like. Now, I want to point out, Chassidim, devout followers of the Tanya, said when the Alter Rebbe writes here that the energy of Atzilut affects a tzaddik, both them and everything that is theirs, the Chassidim would say everything that is theirs refers to all those who follow them, all those who are connected to them. In other words, us, when we connect with them, we also touch a little bit of the world of Atzilut. We can connect a little bit with the world of Atzilut. There's one more thing I want to say about the world of Atzilut. Someone asked, what is the purpose? The final thing I want to say about the world of Atzilut is the next point that Tanya is going to make, which is, even those of us who do not live in the world of Atzilut, we can reach there momentarily every single day in our Amidah. So we once had a course on prayer. And basically, we said prayer is a ladder, right? It says Jacob fell asleep and he saw a ladder in his dream. We understand that's the ladder of prayer. Angels going up and down. It says in our prayer service, we climb up to heaven and we come back down to earth. That's what prayer is about. Slowly elevating ourselves. If you read the prayers, you're elevating, getting more deeper into connection, to a deeper connection to God, until what's the pinnacle of prayer? Anybody knows what's the pinnacle of prayer? What's the pinnacle moment of prayer? Anybody? Nobody has what's the highest moment of prayer? Yes?
Connecting to God.
Right, but correct. But what part of the prayer is the highest moment of connection? Which part of the prayer?
Shema.
Close.
Let's see.
The Amida.
Yeah, the Amida.
The Amida. Very good. The Amida. Very good. The Amida. So we understand that the prayers until Baruch Shamar, until the Psukei D'Zimra, the verses of praise, are elevating us to the spiritual world of Asiyah, creation. Then the Psukei D'Zimra, the section of praise, from Baruch Shamar until Yishtabach, elevates us to the world of Yetzirah, formation. Then the Shema and his blessings elevate us to the world of Briyah, and the Amidah elevates us to the world of Atzilut. Okay? So that is what is going on. Okay? That's what's going on. So let us read here in the text that this is also why Atzilut, even though we generally cannot reach Atzilut, the Amidah is supposed to be a moment of complete nullification to God. That's why it says if you're in the middle of Amidah and a non-poisonous snake, not something that can choke you, but a non-poisonous snake starts to wrap itself around your foot, you shouldn't do anything. You shouldn't move because you're in complete submission to God. So let's read this over here. But if your soul root is underpowered for such a perfect level of Atzilut, meaning most of us, to consistently shed your self-identity and become absorbed in God's light through worship, you may only achieve it occasionally at certain times which are an auspicious moment. In other words, Atzilut means anytime we are completely, anytime we shed our self-identity and are completely given over to God. That's what Atzilut means in our lives. When can that happen? He says, such as during the Amidah prayer, which has the consciousness of Atzilut, especially during the bows, during the Amidah, since all bowing is an expression of the transcendent energy of Atzilut, as stated in Pri Etz Chaim on the commentary of Welcoming Shabbos. Because the theme of bowing is the dissolving of your identity in God's light to be considered zero in His presence, literally. But ultimately, since such a soul only reaches the level of Atzilut occasionally, its primary soul location is the world of Bria. For only occasionally, at an auspicious moment, will this soul rise to Atzilut. At special moments of personal inspiration known as feminine waters, as is known to those well versed in the Kabbalistic esoteric wisdom. The discussion of feminine waters is too complex for right now. We discussed it in chapter 10. You can look there, but we're almost out of time here. So the point is, someone asked beautifully earlier, what is the purpose of Atzilut if we can't reach it? The answer is we can occasionally reach it. We don't usually reach it, but we can occasionally reach it. And so hopefully if we do our prayers diligently every single day, there will be some days that we'll be able to reach it. What does it mean to be in the world of Atzilut? And the world of Atzilut means to completely shed yourself of your, and then you can get a view of the two kids. It means to completely shed yourself of any self-identity, and it means to be completely subsumed and feeling like a chariot to God. That is why, by the way, when we pray, we shuffle a lot, we shake. And now you may see when I pray the Amidah, I also shake. But really, ideally, one should not be shaking during the Amidah, because Amidah is a moment of complete nullification to God, which would mean that one would be completely subsumed within God. One would be thinking only about God at that moment, shedding any sense of self-identity. Anyways, so we have today studied the idea that when one prays, that our kavanah enables us to elevate our mitzvahs to heaven, and then we enjoy the shine of it. And the kavanah, the intention we have, also gives us a garment to enjoy that. We also discussed the idea that there are some people who are much more elevated than us that can reach the world of Atzilut. And however, we will generally not reach there except for possibly during Amidah. But if we connect ourselves to these people, we may feel it more often and we can appreciate it a little bit more. Anyways, it sounds like Miriam wants to take over the class. So I'm going to stop the recording.